Hi everyone. Today I have a very interesting guest. He is an award-winning author of 21 books and screenplays. His most recent work is Among Kings, a historical fiction novel. As a writer and a speaker and an artist coach, Joey is the founder of two Southern California nonprofit organizations, the Congo Reform Association and the Group Center for the Arts and Media. Joey holds a Master's in Leadership Development from Azusa Pacific University. He lives in St. Clement with his family where he loves to read, go to the beach, and compete in Ironman events. Let's talk purpose today with Joey O'Connor. Welcome. How are you?
I'm doing great, Irvin. It's a pleasure being with you today.
The pleasure is all mine, Joey. The pleasure is all mine. First question off the bat. You compete in Ironman events?
I do. I do.
Tell
I
us about that.
well, I started doing it about 7 years ago. I was one of these people. When you see the swim start of an Ironman event where you've got a couple thousand people swimming in the water, and years ago I said, those people are crazy. I would never want to do that. I'd probably drown, but I grew up around the ocean, so I do enjoy swimming. And a friend of mine had gotten me into doing triathlons, and I did a few short races to begin with of, swimming and biking and running. And all along the way, I just felt like I could go further, I could go further. So the typical distances in triathlons are what they call a sprint distance, an Olympic distance that you actually see on the Olympics. Then there's half Ironman events, and then there's the full Ironman event. And so I mainly do half Ironman events, that's a 1.2 mile swim, and then a 56-mile bike ride, and then a 13.1 half marathon run. But I have done one full Ironman, and I did that back in 2015, and that's a really long day because that's like a 2.2 mile swim, then 140 miles on the bike, and then a full marathon run. So it's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun, and it's one of the ways that I try to live my purpose is taking on big challenges.
How do you train for an event like that?
Well, what's really funny is people when they hear about the distances involved, they first off say, "Well, I could never do something like that because that's such a long day, that's such a long way." But as I told people, especially for the full Ironman event, that it's not actually that one day event that's so difficult. It's exactly what you're bringing up. It's all the training leading up to that, because in training, you take a large elephant and you break it down into real small bites. And so as you're training for an Ironman, your training builds, builds, builds. But the final month before an Ironman, you're actually tapering down. You're letting your body rest and recover so that by the time race day comes, your body is in the best possible position and you're really ready to go. So it's not actually the event that's really difficult. It's all the training building up to that.
That sounds exhilarating. I I can't imagine swimming for 2.5 miles.
Uh,
Definitely, that's a lot on the body.
yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah, I think I might have mentioned that the Ironman swim is 2.2. It's actually 2.4, so it is almost 2.5 miles. But again, once you get accustomed to this, and this is really what I think fits for talking about purpose is that in any area of our life, the more we incrementally do something day in and day out, and again, we get positive gains, where our body gets accustomed to these changes. But that's true of our physical lives, our emotional life, the thoughts that we have. our spiritual lives, our relationships. The more we put positive things in, we build up a stored bank of experience.
That's so true. I thought I never could have get up in the morning and start walking and, just taking care of my body.
Mm-hmm.
But as you mentioned, it's a process. It's definitely something that you keep doing, and then you will see the benefits of it.
Right.
And I guess that's really about your focus and your purpose, your mental health, taking care of your own physical health, and then your spiritual health. It all combines to the entire you. And as
Yeah,
we're speaking purpose, um, is the Ironman event is something that you want to continue doing, or you have retired that event?
no, I'm still training and preparing for races because of COVID. Of course, we had a couple races canceled this year, but I'm maintaining my training, and just getting ready for hopefully an event next March if they're able to have it.
Folks, we are speaking to Joey O'Connor, the author of Among Kings. If you want to contact Joey, you can contact him at 949-584-8868 for speaking requests. His website is joey at thegroovecenter.org. And we are here to speak to Joey on this amazing adventures in the Congos, African American Livingstone, and the courageous people who toppled King Leopold II. When I saw that I had the opportunity to interview you, when I read um, some of your information, I said I have to definitely speak to Joey O'Connor because I always thought about Congo and doing missionary work in the Congo. I always thought about visiting Africa to see the Congo. I am I am part of the Western society that really, we hardly hear anything positive about Africa, especially the Congo. When we speak about where you go into the Congo, it's like a lost place. But when I did my research on the Congo, which is recently, I saw it's a beautiful place. It's a really nice place that really had a really horrific history, past history,
Mm-hmm.
and they are still reeling out of that history with Belgium and the enslavement and all that. And when I saw your information, I said yes. As soon as it's possible, I'm definitely having an opportunity to speak with this person. And that's why I'm happy that I got this vision to do this podcast. Let's talk purpose. So tell me, um, among among Kings tells a fascinating story of William Shepherd, the first African American Presbyterian to the Congo in the late 1800s. What inspired you to write Among Kings?
It's a great question, Irvin. It was 13 years ago when my brother-in-law, Ken Straw, came to me and we were having lunch and he said, "Hey, have you ever written any screenplays?" And I said, I studied screenwriting for about 6 months. I wrote one lousy screenplay and then I went back to writing books. So we laughed about that. And he said, "Well, here, I want you to read this book." And he gave me this small, slimline, kind of academic journal type book. And and over the next week, I read it, and it just happened to be Easter Sunday at a family gathering when I saw him again. And I said, "Ken, that was the most fascinating story I've ever read. We must do something." So that began 2 years of researching about the Congo and William Shepherd, his history in the Congo. And the 2 years was spent not only researching the Industrial Revolution, the Great Scramble for Africa, and the Jim Crow period here in America, but it was really learning what it would take to craft a great screenplay. And so we wrote that screenplay in the first 2 years, and then we began submitting it to a few screenwriting competitions. And to our surprise, it began winning a number of awards. Well, and so when it began winning the awards, we knew that we had a good story. And so in that process over a number of years, we had compiled a lot more information, and that's where 3 years ago I said, okay, I want to tell this story in a novel format. And so that began the process of writing the actual historical fiction novel of Among Kings.
Who is William Shepherd, and why is William Shepherd important?
Yes, William Shepherd, he is the first African-American Presbyterian missionary to go to the Congo. He was born the year the Civil War ended in 1865. He went to Hampton University in Virginia, and his lifelong ambition was to go to Africa as a missionary. But early on, he faced racism within the Presbyterian Church. They would not allow a black man to go by himself. So after 3 years of applying, he finally got accepted, and he was partnered with a white missionary by the name of Samuel Lapsley. Now, when they were sent over to the Congo, they were sent as equals. They were commissioned. Lapsley was not as overseer. They went as partners into the Congo. Well, they traveled 1,000 miles up the Congo River, and they faced incredible hardships together, fevers, wild animals. They discovered King Leopold's henchmen, a group called the Force Publique, which was his personal army, as well as tribes that were hostile to outsiders. And so what happened is that William Shepherd and Lapsley became dear friends and brothers in this process of going to the Congo together. But what they discovered, the key hook of the story, is that they discovered that the people in the Congo were not free because King Leopold of Belgium had enslaved the entire Congo for the rubber trade, and he owned the Congo as his own personal possession. So that's just kind of the start of the story, how everything gets going. And Shepherd turns into this remarkable hunter, explorer, art collector, missionary. We'll talk about it, but that's a little bit about William Shepherd, because he's truly a fascinating hero. And here in America, he's really a forgotten African-American hero because no one really knows about him at all, but he's a true historical figure.
Before your book, I would have never heard about this guy. I mean, even the history concerning the African, the Congo slaves and the Belgium history. I saw a documentary concerning, that whole rubber mining situation, and I never saw his name even mentioned here. I guess that's a different type of history. Why is his name not more relevant in terms of the history?
Well, and that's a great question, because we have to remember at this point in history, this is the Victorian era. William was raised in a middle-class home, so he was not impoverished, but he lived in a white man's world. And so he wrote his own personal memoirs. Lapsley wrote his memoirs. But in my research, I have read a couple articles that state that it's perhaps because he was part of the white establishment that his name did not, he didn't become well known, even though during his day, he was what I would call a rock star missionary. He was very well known. He met with 4 U.S. presidents. He had tea with Queen Victoria. He spoke at universities and black and white churches up and down the East Coast of America. So it's one of these things where he was a bright light for a very important period of time. But then as history went on, and as here in America, there became new challenges, his name and his history just kind of went into obscurity. And so that's why one of the reasons why we really want to highlight him is he's a fascinating heroic figure, and people need to know about him, because especially in this day and age, in everything that we've been going on in America the past 50 years in terms of race relationships and how racism and slavery is still rampant in many parts of the world. We think that William Shepard and his friendship with Samuel Lapsley really provide a model of what a healthy interracial friendship looks like of two men who became brothers. And so for that alone, we're hoping that a lot more people come to learn about William Shepard and Samuel Lapsley.
Due to the segregation against at that time, William Shepard had to be accompanied with a white partner by the name of Samuel Lapsley.
Yes.
What is so unique? Why do you think they chose Samuel Lapsley, and what is unique about him?
Well, what's unique about Lapsley, I mean, if you were to look at a photo of the two of them, Shepard is extremely athletic. He's strong. He's muscular. He looks like an American football player. Samuel Lapsley is like the opposite of them. So if you want what's unique about Lapsley, first, he's white, he's balding, he's kind of what we would call a thin geek. So he doesn't look real compelling. But what's interesting about the pairing of the two is that Lapsley's family were former slave owners who owned a 400-acre plantation in Alabama. And his parents, after the war, they had repented of being former slave owners. And it's speculated that Shepard's father was a former slave who had served in the Confederate Army. So to pair these two together, you couldn't get two more opposite people. But again, they became dear friends in the process of going to the Congo together.
In your book, Shepard takes on King Leopold II of Belgium, who has enslaved the entire nation, leading to the first international human rights trial. How did King Leopold II steal Congo?
And this is a fascinating slice of history that I had never studied when I was in high school or college. When you look at what's called the Great Scramble for Africa, it was at the Berlin Conference in 1984 and 1985 in Germany, where over 20 countries throughout Europe divided up Africa, and not a single African was invited to that conference. So Leopold told all these other European nations that he was going to bring civilization, commerce, and Christianity to the Congo. Well, what he did was actually steal the Congo because he never did the free trade that he promised. And again, this is the turn of the century with the Industrial Revolution and the rubber trade. So worldwide, there's a spike for rubber for bicycle tires, automobile tires, electrical wiring of cities. So Leopold enslaves the entire nation. And what most people don't know, and I certainly did not know this before I got into the research, is that he's responsible for the world's fourth largest genocide. It's estimated that under his tyrannical reign, an estimated 8 to 12 million people died in the Congo. And so if you go to Belgium today, there are monuments and great palaces and castles that Leopold built from all the money he pulled out of the Congo. And so it's this utter tragedy. And that's why when we look at the current conditions in the Congo today, it all dates back to this period of history. So that's another reason why I wrote Among Kings, is to link that history over 100 years ago to the current conditions in the Congo today, because the Congo continues to be one of the poorest nations in the world. And fortunately, there's some really good people doing good work there. I've got friends in the Eastern Congo who are Congolese people, and they're doing fascinating work with young people and really making positive change in the Eastern Congo.
King Leopold II, he was really one author put it as the monster of the Congo because
Absolutely.
of what he did.
Yes.
It's tragic, basically tragic. Um, what did William Shepherd achieve when he went there?
Well, what's fascinating in his life story is that during this great scramble for Africa, there was the notion, the lie, the blatant error of calling Africans savages. That was the notion of the day, that these are just wild tribes and savages. What Shepherd did was completely overturn that notion, because he went in search of a called the Kuba Kingdom. It's the Kuba people are still in the heart of Africa today. And what Shepherd discovered is that the Kuba people were highly advanced in their architecture, in their metalworking, in their textiles, in their farming, in every facet of life. They were this large kingdom and a highly advanced tribe. So for that discovery, Shepherd became the first African American man ever inducted into the Royal Geographic Society for discovering the Kuba Kingdom. And he did all sorts of ethnological research, and he brought back from the Kuba Kingdom gifts of artwork that are in Hampton Museum at Hampton University to this very day. And it is one of the finest African art collections in the United States. And that's just another part of Shepherd's amazing story. He discovered this kingdom, and the king of that kingdom actually gave him a royal Kuba knife, which is in the Hampton Museum to this very day.
Powerful. I never knew that.
Yeah, and what it's such a beautiful picture, and that's why we titled the book Among Kings, because Shepherd came from a very modest home in Virginia, but he became a man who stood among African kings and English kings and queens and U.S. presidents, but ultimately he battled a king, and we know that was Leopold.
Mm-hmm. I read through some of your notes, and I saw um, where where he even went along with his eventual wife to the Congo.
Yes, yes.
That's
And
true.
Lucy Shepherd, William's wife, she's a powerful figure. She
Mm-hmm.
was a very strong musician and vocalist. She was a choir leader. She certainly had a lot of courage to go with William to the Congo, but she
Mm-hmm.
stood with him through all sorts of challenges, and she's the heroine of the story.
I saw there's an Edmund Morel as part of your story. Who is Edmund Morel?
Okay, let's talk about Edmund Morel. The story gets better. So while Shepherd and Lucy are in the Congo battling Leopold, Edmund Morel is a shipping clerk who works for the shipping company named Elder Dempster. They're based in Liverpool, and Elder Dempster Shipping Lines, they have the exclusive contract with Belgium for shipping all the rubber and ivory going from the Congo up to Belgium. Well, what Edmund Morel discovers is that King Leopold is not shipping free trade goods from Belgium to the Congo. The only thing he's really shipping are guns, chains, ammunition, and uniforms. And it's Morel who discovers that Leopold is enslaving the nation. He's militarizing the nation. So he began to write articles in the local papers against Leopold. And he ended up forming what was called the Congo Reform
Reform
Association,
Association. Yes.
and he went after he got all the great literary people of his day, and business people and clergy and leaders. He got Joseph Conrad, who wrote Heart of Darkness, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote the whole Sherlock Holmes series, Mark Twain, Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, all these incredible, famous people, both in London and Europe and America, to speak with one voice against Leopold. So Edmund Morel is working in London, Shepherd's in the Congo, and both are pointing all their guns at Belgium.
He is an anti-war activist. Basically, he was the guy that he brought light to what was happening in Belgium. I'm
Absolutely.
seeing that he also got jailed. He
He
spent
he
some time in
did.
jail.
He did. He had protested against the activities of London during World War I, and he served a period of time in jail. I believe it was around 6 to 8 months, and that was really tragic because he before that he was actually he was a member of Parliament as well.
Yes, funny that you mentioned that because Edward Murrell in Parliament, he defeated the great Winston Churchill.
He
He didn't
did.
come from Winston Churchill, yeah,
He
for his
did.
seat. I believe he died in office. He died while he was in office.
Hmm.
So the story really gets interesting when Edmund Morel really came down and he assisted um, Shepard in what he was doing in the Congo.
Absolutely. And it was in London, there was the Congo Reform Association. There was also other missionaries who had taken photos of the atrocities. Shepard had taken photos. Edmund Morel with the Congo Reform Association, they hosted what were called lantern lectures, which were basically large slideshows that illustrated and showed photos of the atrocities. And so both with Edmund Morel's work and the photos that were taken, they're really the first instances of photography being used to document human rights abuses. And Edmund Morel is known as the father of the modern human rights movement. So for people that are involved or familiar with Amnesty International and large worldwide movements like this, they all rest on the shoulders of what Morel did in his work against Leopold.
Could you imagine? I mean, I'm sure you did, because you wrote the book Among Kings. How would it have been like for Shepard to leave America to enter into a place that's not developed, underdeveloped, and how was he accepted or how was he tolerated by Belgium and King Leopold?
Well, in all my research and reading Shepard's memoirs as well, the picture that I got of William Shepard and the picture I really tried to paint in the story is that he was a very winsome character. He had a real graciousness about him. He was a strong leader, so he really had a spine of iron. But at the same time, as an example, they said that he loved children and he played with children. He eventually later on in life wrote children's books, and so you have a man, as we talk about being a man or a woman of purpose. You have someone who's very focused on his purpose in life, and the key priority that he demonstrated was that relationships really mattered, and so he's a man of tremendous courage and is living out his purpose. He certainly had his faults, of which he was honest about, but he's a fascinating character.
How is the Congo past related today?
Well, as we did our research about William Shepard and Edmund Morel and Samuel Lapsley and the history of the Congo, what we discovered is that a lot of people are familiar with the genocide that happened in Rwanda 25 years ago. What most people don't know is that that genocide pushed west into the Congo, and it eventually led to two Congo civil wars. And in the past 25 years, over 6 million people have died in the Congo. And the UN calls the Congo the worst humanitarian crisis since World War II. And so that's why, what brought us to the story here was curiosity. And what has kept us here, still continue to write and to research and to get the word out of what's going on in the Congo, is that if you and I woke up tomorrow and watched the news and heard that 6 million people had died in the past 25 years, well, I hope our response would be outrage and action to do something about it. And that's why we keep telling this story and partnering with our friends in the Congo who are doing really good work there.
Have you ever been to the Congo?
I have. I was there in 2015. I spent about 10 days in the Congo. It was in Africa, a total of 2 weeks, but I went to Goma, which is in the eastern Congo, right on the border of Rwanda. That's where my friends Camille and Esther Ntoto, they have their organization, which is known as Africa New Day, and they do a lot of leadership development. They do a lot of microfinancing. They have an elementary school, a high school. They do a lot of leadership development with young people, and they're just doing phenomenal work. And so I continue to see them 2 to 3 times a year, and we're supporting everything that they're doing there.
I've read that the Congo literally is a piece of land that is worth trillions of dollars.
Absolutely.
Trillions of dollars. But because of bad management and what's happening, the people are not seeing the money.
Yeah, it's a number of people have written excellent books about the Congo, and it has been best described as a failed state because throughout its history, when you look at from Leopold to the Belgium occupation to Patrice Lumumba, who was democratically elected, and then he was murdered quickly after, and then you have Mobutu taking over. Mobutu essentially became just like Leopold in that he stole billions of dollars from the Congo. So there's just been a lot of corruption, and the people of the Congo don't benefit from all the natural resources. Like you said, it's worth trillions of dollars. There's amazing natural resources there. Everything that we have with our cell phones, the gold, the coltan, the tin, the tungsten, a lot of the minerals that fuel our cell phones and our computers, they come from the Congo, but they're being exploited, and not enough dollars are getting back into the people's hands.
That's so sad. I want to congratulate you on doing what you're doing to highlight what's happening in the Congo, and definitely whatever we could do to bring more exposure on what you're doing, we welcome it. In closing, what makes Among Kings relevant for today?
Well, I think what makes it most relevant is, and I would say it's really in alignment with your podcast about talking about purpose, is that William Shepard we see as a man on purpose, and you see the characters throughout the story: Edmund Morell, Lucy Shepard, Samuel Lapsley. They're all seeking to live out their make this world a more beautiful place. And so I think as people read the story, they'll really be challenged and inspired to consider, gosh, how do I make this world a more beautiful place? How do I live on purpose in my relationships, my family, my friendships, my community? And by all of us doing our part, we can make the world a more beautiful place.
We are speaking today to Joey O'Connor, the author of Among Kings. Joey O'Connor is author and a speaker. And Joey can be contacted at joey@thegroovecenter.org, www.joeyo'connor.org, and he's also available. Author Joey O'Connor on Facebook, Joey O'Connor 3 on Instagram, Joey the Groove on Twitter, Joey O'Connor on LinkedIn, and Joey the Groove on YouTube. I must thank you for being a part of this. It was so enlightening to me. I really learned a lot. And I just want to ask you one final question. Let's talk purpose. It's about purpose. And what is a closing line or closing sentence that you would like to leave with the audience? Speaking to purpose.
I would ask a question that I try to ask myself every day when I get up in the morning, spend some time alone, praying, thinking about my day, is asking the question, how can I make this world a more beautiful place? And if we all ask that question, I think the answer will emerge. There's certainly lots of opportunities throughout the day in little small ways to make this world a more beautiful place. So that's a question I'd ask listeners to consider.
What can I do to make this already beautiful world a more beautiful place? What can I do so that people would see the beauty and be at peace with themselves and fulfill their purpose? Joey, this has been a treat. I really enjoyed this interview. I'm enjoying your personality. I really look forward to reading this book. And I want you to continue doing what you're doing, continuing your activism, continuing your nonprofit organization, the Congo Reform Association, and the Grove Center for the Arts and Media. I look forward to actually seeing this movie. I really do. I really look forward. So hopefully that is in the future. And then we could talk about it
I'd love
again.
to. It's a pleasure being with you, Irvin. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Joey. Have a blessed day.
You too.